Hi, this is the AI Storyteller. I'm Mark. The book we are going to interpret for you in this issue is the novel Schindler's List. This novel tells the story of Oskar Schindler, a German businessman who rescued over 1,000 Jewish people during the Nazi regime in World War II. Regardless of whether you like watching movies or not, you have definitely heard of the film Schindler's List. Directed by the renowned Hollywood filmmaker Steven Spielberg, the film was released in 1993 and won numerous prestigious film awards that year, becoming a classic in the history of cinema. The film is actually based on the novel we are discussing today. Spielberg was drawn to this novel because of the contradictions in the protagonist, Schindler. Spielberg once recalled, "This is not a story of Jews saving Jews or of neutral countries like Sweden or Switzerland saving Jews. It's about the Nazis saving Jews." How could a man like him suddenly be willing to risk everything, including his fortune, to save the lives of these Jewish people? A man like him, what kind of person was Schindler? He was an alcoholic, involved in the black market, and had a chaotic personal life. He collaborated with Nazi members for financial gain. However, for the Jewish people he saved, he was a great hero. He risked his own life, accepted Jewish people under the guise of recruiting technical workers, and was willing to bankrupt himself to rescue them. In other words, he was both a complete villain and a determined savior. Such a complex character was not fictional but a real person. Presenting Schindler truthfully to people was one of the writing objectives of this novel's author, Australian writer Thomas Keneally. He came across the true story by chance from a Jewish person who had been saved by Schindler. We will discuss this encounter in detail in the first part. To write this book, Keneally visited 7 countries, interviewed 50 Jewish people saved by Schindler, personally visited the locations where the story took place, and conducted extensive research on relevant documents and letters. To ensure the authenticity of the book, after completing the initial draft, Keneally invited 30 to 40 individuals to read it and made revisions based on their feedback. In 1982, Schindler's List was published and won the prestigious Booker Prize, solidifying Thomas Keneally's status as a world-class writer in the English-speaking world. Although Keneally is a prolific writer, having written over 30 novels, over 10 works of nonfiction, and 4 screenplays, when people mention him, they primarily think of Schindler's List. Alright, today's interpretation has 3 parts. In the first part, we will briefly introduce the background of the author Thomas Keneally, the behind-the-scenes story of his creation of this novel, and the distinctive features of the book. In the second and third parts, we will combine the plot of the novel to tell you what kind of person Schindler truly was and how he carried out his rescue efforts. Part 1. Alright, let's move on to the first part and learn about Thomas Keneally. Born in 1935, Keneally is a writer known for his sense of justice and humanitarianism. Even before Schindler's List, Keneally was already a well-known Australian author. He had won the prestigious Miles Franklin Award twice and was shortlisted for the Booker Prize 3 times. Keneally excels in writing historical novels, with almost every book based on real people or events in history. Most of his works remain true to historical facts, but he uses a modern writing style and psychological analysis to explore the characters and events, striving to present an objective and fair portrayal to the readers. Keneally has continuously expanded the realm of historical writing. His works span across various time periods, from the Middle Ages to the 18th and 19th centuries, to World War I, World War II, and conflicts in the 1980s. He has covered locations ranging from Australia to France, the United States, Africa, the Middle East, and even the Arctic. To put it simply, his works resemble an international news section of a newspaper, rich and diverse. However, due to the broad range of his creations, some critics have accused Keneally's writing of being disjointed. In response, Keneally believes that his works are actually very coherent. This coherence is reflected in his approach to writing. Whether he is writing fiction or non-fiction, he seeks to explore the important individuals involved in major historical events and delve into their character and psychological journeys. In other words, Keneally's historical writing focuses on the complexity and subtleties of human nature. Being an Australian, Keneally was quite distant from the historical events of World War II. So why did he write Schindler's List? This brings us to a chance encounter. In 1980, while in a luggage store in Beverly Hills, California, Keneally met the store owner, Leopold Pfefferberg, who happened to be one of the survivors saved by Schindler. The store owner told him the story of Schindler, and even showed him a suitcase that had been kept for 47 years, filled with original documents related to Schindler. It was as if fate had intervened. History had not yet faded away, survivors were still alive, and those who were saved diligently preserved historical evidence, waiting for an author like Keneally with experience in historical writing to appear. Keneally was indeed inspired by this story and felt the urge to write. Accompanied by Pfefferberg, he traveled to Poland, visited the main locations involved in the event, and interviewed 50 survivors. These materials formed the vital foundation of the novel. Therefore, after completing the book, Keneally dedicated it to Pfefferberg, thanking him for his fervor and unwavering persistence that brought this book to fruition. 25 years after the publication of Schindler's List, Keneally still couldn't fully let go of the passion from those years and wrote a memoir called Searching for Schindler, which served as a conclusion to this extraordinary experience. It is worth mentioning that when this novel was first published, it was titled Schindler's Ark. Apparently, Keneally wanted to express the idea that even in dark moments of history, there are still people who find ways to overcome obstacles and save lives, drawing parallels to the well-known biblical story of Noah's Ark. However, when the book was published in the United States, the term Ark in the title was changed to the more straightforward List. Subsequently, in reprints and film adaptations of the novel around the world, the title became Schindler's List. Perhaps these modifications aim to emphasize the factual style of the entire novel. While reading Schindler's List, we may sometimes feel that the pacing of the story is not as smooth as in typical novels. The annotations and explanations in the book slow down the plot's development. This is because every event in the book, even the most trivial details, is supported by historical documents and the recollections of those involved. Moreover, even when it comes to personal recollections, the author carefully selects and compares them, only using the accounts that best align with historical facts. It can be said that every significant advancement in the story can be traced back to a specific source. This approach, which adheres closely to historical facts, sparked some controversy when Schindler's List was considered for the Booker Prize. The Booker Prize is an award specifically designed for novels. Therefore, defining Schindler's List as either a novel or a non-fiction work and determining its eligibility for the Booker Prize posed a dilemma for the judging panel. Fortunately, the final decision not only acknowledged the historical and intellectual value of Schindler's List but also firmly established the novel's unique and moving literary qualities. Much of this literary quality is achieved through the portrayal of Oskar Schindler, an extraordinary and unforgettable character. Part 2. What kind of person was Oskar Schindler? Now, let's delve into the storyline of this novel. In the prologue of the novel, on the first page, Schindler is introduced in a rather grandiose manner. In the autumn of 1943, amid the fierce battles of World War II, Oskar Schindler, dressed in an expensive coat, emerges in a fashionable apartment building in the city of Krakow, Poland. On the lapel of his tuxedo collar, a large Nazi emblem is pinned. In this prologue, the German businessman drives to the Plazow forced labor camp, 10 kilometers away from the city, to have dinner with SS Hauptsturmführer Mann Goth. From the very beginning, the author reminds us to take note that Mr. Schindler is by no means a conventional gentleman. In Krakow, he lives with a German mistress and maintains a long-term affair with a Polish secretary. His wife, Emily, willingly stays in another country for most of the time, occasionally visiting Poland. In social gatherings, Schindler has a high alcohol tolerance and remains clear-headed even after heavy drinking. He is always generous and thus able to pass through any checkpoint smoothly, providing various rare household items to the SS officers. Oskar Schindler's underlying nature is that of a businessman and opportunist. The novel dedicates a significant portion of its narrative to showcase this aspect of his character. The author provides detailed descriptions of how shrewd and cunning Schindler is in constructing a path to profit from the war. He engages fervently with the Military Armaments Office, the institution responsible for procurement of all household goods within the German army, and establishes connections between officials and businessmen, eventually amassing wealth. The police chief, Schindler, with whom Schindler enjoys drinking, had twice used his power for personal gain to help Schindler avoid punishment and imprisonment. During dinner with SS Hauptsturmführer Goth, Schindler encounters a Jewish maid named Helen in the kitchen. Out of a sudden surge of compassion, Schindler places a heavy kiss on Helen's forehead and gives her a piece of chocolate. Earlier at the dinner table, he had noticed Goth's violent and almost perverse treatment of Helen. He humiliates her, despises her, yet is strangely attracted to her. Of course, it is inconceivable for a Nazi to have any relationship with a Jewish woman. Goth, in order to suppress his unmentionable desires, employs a capricious attitude that instills fear in Helen. Schindler comforts Helen, assuring her that Goth wouldn't shoot her dead like he would an innocent Jewish woman on the street because Goth solely derives pleasure from Helen and wouldn't even allow her to wear the Jewish star, as he doesn't want anyone to know that the source of his amusement is a Jewish woman. Through this description, we can observe that Schindler, the businessman, appears to be solely motivated by profit, but he possesses not only sharp observational skills but also a soft spot deep within him. Almost inadvertently, he takes an interest in Helen's affairs, encouraging her to stay healthy and keep going. In turn, Helen slips a stack of money to Schindler, pleading for him to use it to ransom her sister from the labor camp. Schindler's response is, "I'll treat it as if it were something I'd do for myself." From this point onwards, Keneally firmly establishes the novel's tone, aiming to juxtapose Schindler's opportunistic businessman nature with his selfless humanitarianism. These two characteristics serve as contrasts and collide with each other, intensifying the tension in the text. After the prologue, Keneally continues to develop Schindler's character from these two perspectives, with the awe-inspiring story unfolding between these two traits. Shortly after Schindler's arrival in Krakow, through a chance encounter, he meets a Jewish accountant named Stern. Schindler is drawn to Stern's astuteness, keen business sense, and familiarity with the local situation, while Stern detects a scent of honesty and reliability emanating from Schindler beneath his seemingly reckless exterior. Stern has a vague intuition that in the impending catastrophe, Schindler can serve as a buffer zone and even a refuge against the brutal acts. Why does Stern perceive Schindler as honest and reliable? According to Keneally, it is an instinct passed down through generations of Jews, enabling them to swiftly discern which houses are safe and which areas provide shelter from the storm. Meeting Stern became a turning point for Schindler's career in Krakow. He established an enamelware factory and hired a group of Jewish workers. Around the same time, the Germans accelerated their occupation of Poland and established a Jewish ghetto in Krakow. Disturbing persecution events unfolded one after another, and Schindler could not turn a blind eye. The most impactful scene for Schindler, as depicted in the novel, is when he witnesses firsthand the SS hunting down Jews. In the line of people being driven away by guards, Schindler spots a child stumbling along, unable to tell if it was a boy or girl, wearing a bright red coat and a red hat. This scene is intensified in the film Schindler's List, where a lovable Jewish girl, completely unaware of the danger surrounding her, appears on the big screen. In the black and white film footage, her clothes and hat are the only elements in vivid and captivating red. Schindler's gaze remains fixated on this touch of red as he watches the SS shoot innocent people in the line, his heart filled with turmoil. In the film, the scene transitions to the same touch of red appearing among the subsequent bodies being transported, pushing Schindler's emotions of sorrow and anger to their peak. However, in the original novel, the situation unfolds slightly differently. The little girl quietly slips away from the line and miraculously returns to her originally captured home. The author describes this as a small yet significant victory that presents the possibility of salvation directly in front of Schindler, giving him great courage. The novel summarizes it as follows: "After that day," Schindler would say later, "anyone with a clear mind could see the direction things were going. At that moment, I made up my mind. I would do everything in my power, spend all my resources, and fight this evil system to the end and triumph." Part 3. This novel consists of 38 chapters, and the passage above appears in chapter 15, which is still early in the narrative. All subsequent sections are devoted to describing how Schindler manages to accomplish the immensely challenging task of rescue in an extreme environment. Due to the richness of the novel's material and the multitude of characters and details, we will now explore the incredible and perilous rescue process through 4 dimensions by providing some typical examples. Firstly, rescuing people requires money. Although Schindler had private contacts and exchanged information with members of the Jewish agency, who provided him with clues and some funds for rescuing people, he refused to take any commission from that money. Most of the expenses for saving lives came out of his own pocket. According to survivors' recollections, the later Schindler, in order to include as many lives as possible on his list, spent money like a crazy gambler. One typical example in the book is when Dr. Sapp, the designated physician in the SS prison, heard about Schindler's reputation for spending money recklessly and approached him for a deal. The doctor proposed providing a medical certificate for a female prisoner that would enable her to escape the prison. However, the price for this medical certificate was set at a staggering 50,000 zlotys, the currency used in Poland. Schindler managed to raise the money in just one afternoon and handed it over to the greedy doctor. He ultimately saved over 1,300 Jewish people, and one can only imagine how much of his fortune he had to sacrifice for this. Interestingly, the author does not solely attribute this to Schindler's nobility but humorously states, part of the reason he was so incorruptible, of course, was that he had no sense of the relative value of money, whether it was owed to him or he owed it to someone else, and the other was his strong sense of honor. Furthermore, rescuing people requires courage and passion. The Nazis' brutality and inhumanity permeate throughout the numerous details in the book, making it challenging to read without a strong nerve. Schindler himself lived in such a high-pressure environment, where his life could be taken away at any moment if his acceptance of Jewish workers under the guise of recruiting skilled labor was exposed. The novel vividly describes several instances of Schindler and his factory being inspected and suspected. Schindler himself was even imprisoned for interrogation. However, he never showed the slightest sign of fear or retreat. One typical scene in the book occurs during Schindler's second visit to the Plazow labor camp, where he witnesses the roaring flames of the burning bodies. The novel describes this scene with intense passion and deep emotion. Schindler's initial reaction upon arriving at the labor camp was to not get off the car and turn back home, but he didn't do that. Instead, he got off and visited friends in several workshops before going to Stern's office. He had thought that, at a time when the window glass was covered in ashes from the cremations, it was highly possible for the prisoners in Plazow to feel that death was preferable to life, and thoughts of suicide might arise. However, in reality, he turned out to be the only one who felt that way. After seeing Stern, Schindler let out a low growl and asked, "What do they think?" Stern told him that the prisoners were just prisoners, merely following orders to do their assigned tasks, hoping to survive. Schindler said that he wanted to save all the prisoners, at least to save Stern. Thirdly, saving people requires extraordinary cunning. During the war, Schindler established both an enamelware factory and a military supply factory. These two factories not only helped him accumulate the wealth and bribes necessary for saving people but also provided him with an excellent excuse to search for, hide, and transfer Jewish individuals. Especially in the military supply factory, subsequent investigations revealed that the factory often operated in a state of passive sabotage, producing substandard shells. However, Schindler used his extensive connections to create a certain mysterious atmosphere around the factory. The locals generally believed that Schindler's enterprise was involved in the production of secret weapons. In reality, there was no such thing, but Schindler confidently stating it actually had a misleading effect. This was because Hitler had publicly promised to develop a secret weapon. This phrase became Schindler's most powerful protective shield. Once, when an SS officer inspected Schindler's military supply factory and attempted to use violence against a worker, Schindler heard the news and rushed downstairs, shouting, "You can't kill people here. If you lay a hand on someone here, my workers won't be able to complete an important war contract." This was a typical Schindler-style argument, implying that anyone who dares to act recklessly on his premises will face consequences. However, the soldier persisted and questioned Schindler, "What's in it for me?" Schindler immediately changed his approach and asked in response, "Vodka, perhaps?" This defused the crisis. In addition, among the Jewish individuals Schindler accepted, there were not only unarmed elderly, weak, and women and children but also people with various special skills. They all proved valuable at critical moments. For example, there was a person named Pfefferberg who could forge a large number of official seals and various types of passes using the simplest tools. The prisoners, armed with these passes, drove trucks loaded with bread, black market gasoline, flour, fabric, or cigarettes to Schindler's factory. Lastly, saving people also requires a lasting and incredibly sharp insight into human nature and social etiquette. In this novel, we often come across such examples. Amon Goeth, an SS captain who appears in the prologue, is a character full of contradictions, extreme violence, and an erratic personality. He is the most prominent antagonist in the entire book and movie. The confrontation between Schindler and Amon is not only filled with intellectual and strategic battles akin to a cat-and-mouse game, but also offers deeper reflections. Despite their similarities in terms of family background, physical characteristics, interests, and even certain aspects of their spiritual world, they ultimately exhibit completely opposite value orientations. Schindler's process of intellectual sublimation and fanatical rescue efforts unfolds simultaneously with Amon's escalating cruelty and erratic behavior. The characters embody the concept of heaven and hell residing within individuals. One evening, in Amon's villa, Schindler suddenly conceived the idea of taking the Jewish people out of Krakow and began probing Amon's attitude. He mentioned wanting to move his factory to Czechoslovakia, taking all the skilled workers with him, and possibly selecting some workers from the Plazow labor camp. If Amon could facilitate the process and choose people from Plazow based on the list Schindler provided, he would express endless gratitude with generous rewards. Amidst the clinking of glasses and mingling of conversations, it seemed that the deal was settled. Seizing the opportunity, Schindler made an even riskier request. He wanted to play a game of cards with Amon, who was a compulsive gambler. If Schindler lost, he would have to pay a large sum of money, but if he won, he could add Amon's Jewish maid, Helen, to Schindler's list. We have mentioned Amon's complicated feelings towards Helen before, and Schindler had previously made numerous attempts to rescue her but failed. However, on this night, perhaps overcome by passion or enticed by Schindler's exceptional manipulation, Amon surprisingly agreed to Schindler's request. This highly dramatic scene concluded with Schindler narrowly emerging as the victor. He returned all the money he won from Amon that night, and true to his word, Amon allowed Schindler to add Helen's name to the list. Another story unfolds in the latter part of the novel. Schindler encountered great difficulties in transferring a group of female workers, and unfortunately, they ended up in the Auschwitz concentration camp, facing a perilous situation. Schindler knew that the camp commander had a weakness for women, so he entrusted a beautiful secretary with a large diamond ring and sent her with a list of female prisoners to the Auschwitz camp commander. The details of this legendary episode vary in the accounts of those involved, and the mystery remains unsolved. What we do know is that indeed, a woman, entrusted by Schindler, fearlessly entered the lion's den and bravely made a deal with the devil, ultimately rescuing all the female prisoners. At this point, the story of Schindler and his list is about to draw to a close. Subsequently, as depicted in the movie, over 1,300 Jewish individuals, under Schindler's protection, successfully received the news of victory in World War II. However, what the movie did not mention was that Schindler's glorious days came to an end. He received little recognition and awards. After the Soviet army repelled the German forces, Schindler, in order to save his life, disguised himself as a Jewish refugee. His property was confiscated by the military, and the few remaining pieces of jewelry were exchanged for food and alcohol. In peacetime, Schindler no longer possessed the vigor he had during the war. He made several attempts to rebuild his business empire but ended in failure. At the same time, he submitted an application to the West German Ministry of Finance, seeking compensation for his wartime losses, but with little success. German media coverage of Schindler's story only made his life more difficult. While walking the streets of Frankfurt, people threw stones at him. In 1963, a worker called Schindler a Jew-kissing pig, which enraged him and led to Schindler punching the man. In court, Schindler was charged with assault, and the judge ordered him to pay compensation for bodily harm. Those who encountered Schindler in his later years described his situation as depressed, lonely, and disillusioned. In 1974, Oskar Schindler fell critically ill in a cramped apartment and passed away in the hospital on October 9. As per his final wish, he was laid to rest in Jerusalem. The last sentence of the novel is, "On every piece of land, there are people mourning his loss." All right, the essence of the novel Schindler's List has been interpreted up to this point. The writing style is plain, with most of the narrative organized in a non-fictional manner, meticulous and rigorous. What qualities does this novel possess that enabled it to win the Booker Prize and become a classic in contemporary literature? I believe the main reasons are as follows. Firstly, the true event itself carries tremendous power. The author doesn't require much embellishment. He simply needs to present the details of the event to evoke universal emotions and profound reflection. Keneally's skillful organization of material is evident, effortlessly handling such weighty subject matter. In the novel, Keneally juxtaposes the conditions of the labor camp and Schindler's refuge, creating a striking contrast between great benevolence and great evil, further enhancing the emotional impact of the event. Secondly, through character portrayal, Keneally successfully achieves his literary pursuits within this semi-historical work. The novel features a multitude of characters, large and small, in a typical ensemble style, and Keneally handles them with meticulousness and precision. Even if we may not remember the names of many characters while reading, the various details of their life or death moments linger in our minds once we close the book. Supporting characters like Stern, Helen, and Iman are vividly brought to life by Keneally's craftsmanship. Of course, the most touching character in the entire novel is Schindler himself, a remarkable fusion of extreme traits. To some extent, he is far from perfect, being a fraud, an alcoholic, and a womanizer. However, in that absurd and extreme era, it was nearly impossible to save thousands of Jewish people from Nazi concentration camps without someone as adaptable as Schindler. This was precisely the original intention that prompted Keneally to write this novel. He used hundreds of thousands of words to explore a question that cannot have a definitive answer. You couldn't be sure when opportunism gave way to selfless rescue in him, Schindler. I like this subversive fact, that the power of the spirit and noble intentions shine brilliantly in the least likely places. In reality, there were many Germans who helped Jewish people under the clutches of the Nazis, besides Schindler. For example, German businessman Madrid Richter risked going to the black market to buy bread for Jewish people. Within the Nazi SS, some individuals secretly protected Jews, while others did everything they could to assist Schindler in saving Jewish lives. In times of turmoil, their acts of kindness radiated the brilliance of humanity. No matter how dark the moment, no matter how powerful the forces of evil, there is always the radiance of humanity flickering and the human soul growing. Well, that concludes the content for this episode. If you enjoyed my video, please click like, subscribe to my channel, and share it with your friends. Thank you.